Good evening and welcome. My name is Alice Knapp, president of the Ferguson Library, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our ongoing signature lecture series on civility in America. We're bringing you this series with our partners, the Dylan Schneider Group and Hertz Media. And tonight we are very fortunate to have Rick Slager, the founder and CEO of InvuCare. He has been in the healthcare business for almost 40 years. And prior to starting InvuCare, Rick was CEO of Carrington Health, an assisted living company. InvuCare is working to create a platform to improve the lives of patients, families, and the care teams that support them by seamlessly blending in-person care and active remote care. Rick received his BS and JD from the University of Notre Dame. And if we have time tonight, maybe we can talk about some of his football exploits. But for right now, I want to turn it over to Rick.
Thank you, Alice. And hello, everyone. I can't tell you how much I wish I could be with you and we could be in the same room. And hopefully that happens soon for these lectures. When I was asked by Bob, Dylan Schneider, who's been a longtime friend and mentor of mine, to do a lecture in his Civility in America series, it was just a tremendous honor, and certainly having this part of the Ferguson Library is just been it's been very humbling, and I appreciate it tremendously. I want to start my comments off by, it's something we were talking about a little bit before this call. Civility is one of those things I don't think we think enough about until all of a sudden we're forced to really think about it. And I definitely think we're at a time in the history of this country where there can't be too many more important topics of discussion than civility in America. And I don't have to go through all the reasons why, but the political divide that's occurring, what's happening in homes where people aren't being able to visit one another, things that are happening with businesses not being able to communicate as well other than virtually. It's good that we have forums like this to really express issues and concerns that we have. I've looked at civility from a lot of different angles, and I kind of wrap it up in what I'll be sharing with you tonight, which is over time, 1 song, 2 books, and 3 coaches. And I say that 1 song, 2 books, and 3 coaches because that's where the experiences that I've really had in my life that have given me a vision or a view into the wisdom of civility. Obviously, to me, it's a lot more than just proper manners, being polite, doing the right thing. It's truly about, like I said, a lot more. And we're going to get into that when I get into the 1 song, 2 books, and 3 coaches. The interesting thing about civility to me is that it's a constant. And it's a constant which there aren't many of them in an ever-changing world. I think civility also really, the wisdom of civility requires discipline. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Discipline in what we say, discipline in how we act, discipline in what we do, discipline in our relationships. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I would categorize civility as is really defined and often refined in our own lives by our own individual experiences. So first of all, let me start off with civility as a constant. I look at the very basics of civility as being really very much the golden rule. And interestingly, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, actually dates back to 1500 BC, the time of Moses. And in Leviticus, which is the 3rd book in the Bible, it talks about the respect. It talks about doing things for others and doing things that you would have them do unto you. It literally is talking about that many years ago. So to say it's a constant, I think we're pretty well on a good basis to go there. With regards to that, it's interesting. When I went to bed on December 31st, 2020, I went to bed very grateful in many respects for a lot of things, but I was also grateful that the year was coming to an end. Like most of you, I would imagine it was a difficult year. We have parents that are 95 and 91, my wife and I, and we weren't able to see them for fear of carrying the virus into their home. We have 6 grandchildren, and all of a sudden, all the times that we like to spend with our kids and our grandchildren went away. In fact, so much so that I'm moving from Scottsdale, Arizona to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so that in the future, if there's anything or this continues on for a long period of time, we'll have the ability to be with our children and with our family, and certainly helping to take care of our 95-year-old grandfather and 91-year-old grandmother. The pandemic has impacted all of us in a lot of ways, and I think we're all caught by surprise. And certainly, hundreds of thousands of deaths, now up to 500,000 was the most recent thing I saw. Millions infected, even millions more impacted, either through family members or friends. The year also created a tremendous amount of economic uncertainty, lost businesses, jobs, bankruptcies, quarantines, lockdowns, and the full economic impact. I'm pretty certain we still haven't seen the end of that. But worst of all to me has been the political vitriol that has all of a sudden seemingly, for me, come out of nowhere. I mean, there were always differences, there are always different sides to every issue, but the anger and the frustration and the word and name calling and all the things that went on during the election, I thought was actually staggering and frightening. Interestingly, 4 years ago, I was operating a company out of Los Angeles and found myself, following the election, walking into several offices at the time, and people huddled together and actually crying, which I had never seen about an election before. But this year, to walk out and see fighting and burning and destruction and all of that, I just think that we've reached a level of destruction that is uncalled for and really needs to be reined in. Obviously, there have been a lot of fractured friendships, ruined family gatherings, and a never deepening polarization in this country. And it really does need civility, and we need to find a way to bring it back into this country. I read an article not too long ago that said that 4% of the people that responded with regards to the current times had expressed suicidal thoughts, all because of politics. And obviously that's very sad, as well as just incredibly difficult to understand how we could have gotten to this point in this country, a country as great as this country. So I woke up on January 1st after going to bed, hoping and praying that we'd have a new year, and we certainly had a new year. And actually there were a couple changes, certainly with the pandemic, with the vaccine that's now released, and obviously millions have now been vaccinated. I've received my first dose, and looking forward to number 2 here shortly. The economy's gotten a little bit of a boost through the stimulus package. As I said before, I still think we're not seeing the worst of it, and there are certainly going to be ramifications from what happened. But the anger and the disappointment that I'm seeing still in the political environment, even though we've at least appears that we've settled the election period. When I saw the rush on the Capitol and the things that were happening, I just felt like we've got to get this under control, and we've got to find common grounds. We've got to find ways to compromise. We've got to find ways to speak civilly to each other. And that's really my hope today, is if nothing else, we at least start a discourse that gets us all a little bit riled up to see this country return to a more civilized environment where people can continue to thrive and do the things that are so positive in this country. What's happening now is truly tearing us apart. And so I'm going to start with the first of the 3 categories that I said about the importance and the wisdom of civility that has come into my life. And it starts with a song, and thankfully to all of you, I'm not going to sing it. I'm just going to remind you of it. I'm going to talk about these two books that have been very helpful for me during this period of time that has really given me some insight into not only what is happening, but also wisdom as to how to deal with it. And then 3 coaching experiences I've had in my lifetime that have definitely had a major impact on my life, and all having to do with civility. First of all, the song. We can all remember back to 1965, at least, again, not looking at everybody here, but I certainly remember 1965 when a song was released by the Byrds called Turn, Turn, Turn. And interestingly, if you look it up, it says the book was written in 1950 by Pete Seeger, but the reality of it is the Turn, Turn, Turn was really written by King Solomon in 1000 BC and can be found just almost verbatim in Proverbs or in Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 through 9. And it's all about there's a season for just about every purpose under heaven. And there's got to be some faith that we have that there's a reason for all of this. It talks about in the song, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep, a time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. I find it fascinating that those words resonated so well in 65. And now to this day, you hear it at funerals, you hear it at weddings, you hear it at everywhere. But when I talk about over time, there's a lot of changes, but again, civility stays constant. And it's the last words of that song that I really enjoy the most, which talk about a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. And I believe that. I believe that we have a time for peace. And I do believe it's not too late. And I do believe it is coming. And I do believe that if we rally together and begin to really look at our lives and at the lives of the people impacted by the vitriol that is out there, we can truly do something about it and help make it better. 2 books. In 1986, which was a year for me that was my most difficult, from a personal reason, from a business reason, from, I guess, a couple different things. But in 1986, a friend of mine, when I was going through what I was going through, suggested that I read The Richest Man That Ever Lived. It's a book by Stephen K. Scott. And interestingly, as you read the book, you hear about some young man who, which is actually him, I have come to learn, who had 9 jobs over 6 years following college and was fired from every one of them, and really had come to kind of the end of his rope and wondering if there was anything that he could do to really change the course that he was on. And a friend of his said to him, listen, you need to read the book of Proverbs. He said, the book of Proverbs is by many believed to be a book on wisdom, which it definitely is. And it was written by King Solomon. Interestingly enough, I brought him up before. It was written by King Solomon. And King Solomon, apparently the way he got his wisdom was one night in his sleep, he was asked by his maker if he could have anything in the world, what would he want? And his response to that was, what I'd really like more than anything is wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And obviously his maker was so impressed by his response that he gave them all 3. He gave him the ability to be very wise, have a lot of knowledge, and a lot of wisdom. And he took that wisdom and again, interestingly, turned it into, and he became the richest man in the world. And arguably to this very day, he became the richest man that ever lived, having received apparently during his 39-year reign over 15 tons of gold a year. And in life at that time in the world was very good. The economy was great. Everything was running well. But to gain that wealth, there was a lot of discipline involved. And what it taught me about discipline was the book said, read a chapter a day out of Proverbs. It takes about 5 minutes to 10 minutes a day to do. There's 31 chapters, 31 days in a month. By the end of the month, you will have read the entire book, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. And since 1986, that's what I've been doing. I read the book of Proverbs every morning. And not that I have become the wisest man that ever lived, and certainly not that I've become the richest man that ever lived, but I will tell you that the book of Proverbs hits on principles that directly relate to civility. The first is, this isn't about you. It's not about you alone. It's about everyone that's surrounding you and how you treat those individuals. It's about gaining knowledge, wisdom, and understanding throughout your life. It's about learning how to love unconditionally. It's about forgiving. It's about being careful what you say and how you say it. It's about humility and being humble always. It's about being open to the needs of others, which I think would help dramatically in these times. It's about walking the talk, not just talking the talk, but actually walking that talk. It's about holding yourself accountable. It's about holding others accountable. It's also about listening, which is oftentimes a very hard thing for me to do. But in the end, it's really about being kind. And when I think about the wisdom of civility, I think of those things, not about myself, about knowledge and wisdom and understanding, being kind, and doing the things that really do allow me to do unto others, or hopefully do unto others as I would have them do unto me. From a personal experience perspective, and this is now my three coaches. My three coaches in my life that have had the most impact on my life, actually the first one was in 1988, and this was well after I had played at Notre Dame. But my coach was the coach that I was asked to actually entertain and take care of for a day while before he was being inducted into the Touchdown Club's Coach of the Year award, because Notre Dame had won that year the national championship. I had the chance to host him, and I had the chance to spend time with him. I had the chance to have him spend time with one of my 7 children, my oldest son at the time. And he was just an incredible man. He was an incredible leader. And he was so gracious to my son that I'll never forget it. But the thing I'll really never forget is at dinner that night, he had a great talk. And I don't know if any of you have heard Coach Holtz talk, but he's such a great speaker. But he talked about a poem that he said, and it went something like this: I saw a group of men in my hometown, a group of men tearing a building down. With a heave and a hoe and a mighty yell, they swung the beam, the side wall fell. And I said to the foreman, are these men skilled, the kind of labor you'd use to build? And he smiled and said, no, indeed. Common labor is all I need, for I can tear down in a day or two what it took a builder 10 years to do. And I had to think as I walked away, which of these roles am I going to play? The lesson on civility for me from Coach Holtz was the importance of us being builders, being the kind of people that build relationships, build new opportunities, build experiences, do the right thing towards being a builder and not just tear down. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of tearing down in this country over the last year and a half. And it's time that it stops, and it's time that we do something about it and become builders and help rebuild what has been torn down. So Coach Holtz will forever hold a dear spot in my life. And that's what I do now. I build companies. I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to build multiple companies in multiple sectors. Nursing home companies initially, then assisted living companies, and then hospice companies, and now palliative care companies, and now an IT company. So I just really truly believe that being a builder is what we're all meant to be. And we've all been given that skill, and we all need to really look into our hearts and figure out a way to bring that to those that we know and care about. 1972, Coach Woody Hayes. And I didn't play for either of these coaches, Holtz or Woody Hayes, but I lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I was recruited by Ohio State in 1972. And interestingly, it would have been a really fun time to go to Ohio State because I ended up with a running back called Archie Griffin, who has become a very close friend of mine, a good friend of mine. And but Coach Hayes had the reputation, as many of you might know that are on this call, of being pretty tough, actually being very tough. Not afraid to show his anger, not afraid to be upset, not afraid to throw things, not afraid to do anything. And as a recruit, what we did is we sat behind the bench at the team. And this particular game that they invited me to come to watch with the other recruits was a game against Colorado. And interestingly, coming down to the very end of the game, Ohio State was up by 6 points. There were 7 seconds left on the clock. Colorado was on, I believe, their own 48-yard line, so we had a long way to go. And lo and behold, it was the first Hail Mary I've ever seen thrown. The quarterback dropped back, threw it as high and as far as he possibly could, and the wind and air just blew right out of that stadium. And the next thing you knew, that ball was being batted around in the end zone, and it fell to the ground incomplete. Time had expired. You think everything's good. We know we're running into the locker room right after this to meet Coach Hayes. And lo and behold, if a flag doesn't fly, and they called interference. And back then, interference put the ball on the 1 yard line. So when they put it on the 1 yard line with no timeout, they had one play to play, they did score. Before that, or right after that, I guess, Woody Hayes goes flying across the field. He is breaking the yard markers. He's throwing everything he can get his hands on onto the field. They're trying to get him under control. He's screaming and yelling. And I'm thinking, wow, not to put civility into this, but wow, this is going to be a difficult time to meet Coach Hayes. And he was obviously kicked out and sent to the locker room. And there we were headed into the locker room to meet a very fiery, very upset, very disheveled coach. And so sitting there, it was deathly quiet. And sure enough, Coach Hayes came in. And interestingly, he was as calm as any human being I've ever seen. He totally did not expect that at all. And he looked at everybody that was sitting there and he said, "You're probably wondering why I acted that way." And obviously we were all thinking that. Not only why did he act that way, but was he over it? And he said, "Let me tell you what happens here. I recruit every one of these boys. I go to every one of their homes. I talk to them. I talk to their parents. I talk to them about the importance of a good education. I talk to them about the importance of what it will mean to them to come to Ohio State and you to know that I am there to protect them. And I'm there to protect them from anything happening to them that they don't deserve. And they did not deserve that call in the game at that time. So I did what I had to do to back up my words to their family. And I did what I needed to do to make sure that they knew that I had their back." And I tell you, as a player, 18 years old at the time, to hear that from a coach, it only made me want to play for him more. Now, I was a quarterback, and he was not really favorable to quarterbacks, and that he would throw the ball maybe 3 times a game. So it isn't where I ended up playing, but I will tell you this: I walked away with a tremendous amount of respect for a man who stood up for what he had said. And I also walked away thinking to myself, I'll never again judge a book by its cover or what somebody tells me beforehand. I need to listen to that person and really get to know who that person is. So that to me became very important in my life. Finally, the third coach, Coach Era Parsegian, and I did get to play for Era Parsegian, and I was recruited by Era. But unfortunately, 2 years before my senior year, which I'd started my last 2 years, and so not under Era, but he retired. I was to play the biggest game of my college career, the first game of my senior season, and we were playing Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh had a running back named Tony Dorsett, who also some of you or many of you on this call may know. He was all world at the time. He did win the Heisman Trophy after that year. He was a player that everyone knew. And up till that time, before his senior year, he had run for over 850 yards against Notre Dame. So that's just in 3 seasons. So now we were playing him. They're playing them the last season and of his season. It was my last season. And it was interesting. Notre Dame ended up not cutting the grass, I think, for probably about 3 weeks on the field. They thought that high grass would slow them down. They didn't realize it was going to slow everybody down. But the game started with the kickoff, and we got the ball. And I was fortunate enough to throw 3 passes, and we scored, and everybody went crazy. The fans went nuts. And then we had to kick off to them. 2 plays later, Tony ran 80 yards, touchdown. So now he's up to 930 yards that he's run against Notre Dame. And there's just no way we could stop him. I ended the game literally 3 out of 15 passes. I didn't complete another pass other than a sideline pass that I once threw to the other team, to Pittsburgh, who ran it in for the touchdown. And it was just a humiliating and horrible defeat. In fact, so bad, I really didn't want to go back to school. I didn't want to go back to Notre Dame. I came home. My parents were there. My high school coach had come to the game. It was truly kind of built as the game of the year to be played, because the 2 of us they were rated 1. I think we were rated 3. And it was a blowout. And I just can tell you that the embarrassment that I felt, the disappointment that I felt, I just didn't know what I was going to do next. Well, interestingly, Sunday, I had a knock on my door, and in walked Eric Parsegan. And again, remember, he wasn't my coach at the time. He had left 2 years previously. And he turned to me and he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I told him the way I was feeling, and the way I was hurt, and the way I was disappointed, and the way I felt like I let everybody down. And it just, I didn't feel like it was going to be easy to go back. But, and he made a comment. He said, "Well, tomorrow we're going to find out who you really are," and left the house. And I thought about that, and the reality of what he was telling me is, this is going to determine a big part of what happens to you for the rest of your life. Are you going to fall down and you not get up, or are you going to get up and make something happen? And fortunately, I got up, and fortunately, the next game I had the best game of my 2 years, and things got back on track. But the lesson I learned, the civility lesson I learned from him, was being open to the needs of others. He knew where I was going to be on that Sunday morning. He knew how I was going to be feeling. He didn't need to take his Sunday morning to come see me. He didn't need to take the Sunday morning to help me, but he did. He took the time out of his life to help me basically grow a notch in my life, as well as incredibly gracious and incredibly kind and incredibly thoughtful. And he knew I had a need, and he made it happen. So all I can tell you is my life, through the song that I talked about, through the issues with regards to the books, with issues with regard to the coaches, has taught me a lot about civility, and has taught me a lot that it's far more than just being polite and using proper manners. It's really being there when others need you. It's really making sure that you follow the golden rule and really do treat others the way they deserve to be treated. It's really does mean not calling something and making a decision before you've had the chance to meet that person. It's really making sure that you have a chance to really hear from them. It's about empathy. It's about caring. It's about being there for others. And I will tell you that if we could do that, if we could all literally be the builders, or literally do the right thing for wisdom, really seek those kinds of opportunities to show others that we care about them, I think we can turn this whole thing around. And I do think the season for peace is right in front of us. but it's going to take some discipline on our part to make it happen. I really appreciate having the chance to talk to you, and hopefully it's resonated with some of you, and I'm certainly open to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's incredibly rich. And I just want to say there's a lot to unpack there. So this recording will be living on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and see it. We do have some really great questions. And since you talked about the importance of the coaches, I want to lead off with one on role models. Last night we had a panel discussion about the documentary Black Men in White Coats. And that documentary says, since 1978, 1979, the number of Black doctors has decreased dramatically. And so what is the, and one of the messages in there, you really need to see a Black doctor in order to want to be one. What is the importance of role models? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think they're hugely important because it's how we learn. I mean, it's how we, nobody comes into this world with all the answers for certain. And I've always looked to role models in my life. I was very fortunate in my life. My father was a white physician. He was an orthopedic surgeon and probably one of the kindest human beings I've ever met. But I think role models play a big role. I had a high school coach, which was an incredible role model as a person and as a coach. But I've also had professionals in different things. I've had the good fortune of being around a lot of private equity people, a lot of venture capital people, and a lot of people in all kinds of different businesses. I'll never understand literally why color makes a difference. I will always struggle with, for instance, I told you about Archie Griffin and the Ohio State experience. Archie Griffin became one of my very good friends. My other very, very good friend from Notre Dame, who's actually the athletic director at the Ohio State University today, Gene Smith, is a very, very close friend. I just think we all need to open up our eyes to the fact that I believe everyone is here for a reason, and they all have something to give, and they all have something that you can learn from. And it shouldn't matter. And in fact, when you break that barrier and you decide that you're going to go to that church that you wouldn't typically go to, or you end up coming out a much wiser person for it.
One of the first questions received, it goes back to the golden rule. And the question is if an individual does not know how they would like to have done to them, what do you do then? And I think that gets to the whole concept of self-love. And if you don't know how you want to be treated, how can you treat others well?
Yeah, I guess I don't know that person. I think we all kind of have a feeling that we'd like to have, and I'm not saying that's a bad question. I think it's a great question. I haven't met that person, but I do know that I wouldn't want to treat anybody different than I would want to be treated. And I guess I would say if somebody wants to be treated in a rough way, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how that would come about, but it would be, it's not something that I guess I've thought much about, and I'd want to give it a little thought, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So one of the things in your career, you were one of the leaders in assisted living, and now the work you're doing is just so incredibly important. I know I have a mother in a nursing home, and just the care when you're lived 7 hours away is really hard to monitor. So I think that's just incredibly important. How do you see civility in your field of healthcare, or in the field of healthcare today?
Well, I'll tell you that, well, first of all, it's interesting that that question comes up because we have found that civility in the workforce has a lot to do with the outcomes of care. Where there is civility, you have a higher patient satisfaction, you have better care from the individuals providing the care. There was an article that I did read earlier, and I actually copied a piece from it today that it said, healthcare teams are failing for many reasons, but the most common obstacle to success is incivility. And it's because oftentimes the way that it was phrased in this article, it was because of the way the individuals were being treated by their, a nurse by a physician, somebody that is in a different position and feeling then unworthy of really and incapable of providing the care or service itself. And then they did a study at one point in time on teamwork within healthcare, and they found out the most common thing that was happening were teamwork failures were creating the greatest problems for healthcare in terms of numbers of deaths, in terms of significant injuries that should not have happened otherwise. And they all aimed towards civility. So it has a much bigger role in the healthcare field than you know. My philosophy has been, and the work that we're doing now through InView is all around the premise that what is most important to the patient? And particularly in my line of work now, where I've been treating a lot of hospice and palliative end of life, chronic care management types of patients. And I don't say I treat, I've been the CEO. I fortunately have very good individuals that I've fortunately been able to surround myself with that actually provide the actual care. But the basic premise upon which we provide care is basically along the lines of what should be or is most important to them. And I came up with what we call the care acronym, and the care acronym stands for, particularly for the elderly, frail patient population, is all has to do with having them have access to the things that are most important to them. And access to those most important things, we write as their community. That's the C, their family, the friends that are people that are most critical to them. Activities that give them a reason and a purpose to wake up the next day, because that's such a difficult thing when they really don't have anything to look forward to. The R was vital resources. How do they get the medications they need, or the house cleaning services that they have to have, or whatever. And the final piece, I call it edutainment, because it's both an education and entertainment component. And the education is as much for the family as it is for the individual. If you can provide those four things in one way, shape, or form, you're all of a sudden able to not only treat them civilly, in a way in which you would want to be treated, but you're giving them access to the things that are most critical to them. So that's how I would answer that.
All right. How has COVID impacted civility on the field?
On the field of healthcare, on the field of, okay.
On the field of healthcare.
Field of healthcare, I think there's, well, first of all, let's talk about the first responders to this whole pandemic and the people that literally were in the nursing homes and in the isolated. It's brought to light the importance and the need for telemedicine and telehealth, which should have been there and present for a long time, but there was a lot of resistance to allowing that. I think that's been incredibly helpful. Although interestingly, during the pandemic, the technology that we had, was all facility based. And when they did lockdowns and quarantines, you couldn't get into the facility. So we're going to have to do something about that. But my biggest issue with regards to COVID and what it's really done is, it's obviously incredibly tragic what's happened. 500,000 plus deaths, so many people affected by it. But what I don't think we have any idea of yet is that the impact of isolation and loneliness for a senior is deadly in and of itself. And I don't think we were prepared as a country, which I think we will be from here forward as a country, to how are we going to deal with the isolation and loneliness of a senior who is needing care? Because lockdowns and quarantines solve part of the issue with regards to the clinical needs, but the psychosocial and social needs are not being addressed.
Yes, as I Yes, as I mentioned, my mom's in a nursing home, but that really resonates with me. We have a Zoom call every week, and
Right.
it's really, you can tell it's been hard with her, on her. One of the questions that came in via chat is, can you tell a story from your experience where you had to turn the other cheek?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of one. I guess, first of all, being a CEO of a company, there are times in which you have to make very difficult decisions. And in that process, obviously, when you make difficult decisions, you hear different people react in different ways. And there have been occasions where I have gotten back from employees of mine that so and so did so and so and said so and so about you, and it wasn't kind, it wasn't what I meant, or wasn't what I did. But I didn't fire them because of ego. I didn't let that get in my way of making a good decision or turning something that maybe needed more explanations. I think part of the problem that as I mentioned during my talk, is I'm very action oriented, and sometimes listening is not my greatest skill. And I think sometimes in turning the other cheek, we just have to listen to what are they really saying and really understand what it is they're trying to tell you, because there could be a gold nugget in there that could make you better at what you're doing. And you got to put your ego on the side and approach those issues very humbly. And because my first reaction is like probably most people's reaction is to fight right back. But I found that in healthcare, particularly, you really need to take a back seat to the reality of how you're treating your people. And I've had to be careful sometimes to listen rather than respond.
And here's our last question for this evening. If someone's fundamental premise is that it's a zero-sum world, does that allow for thinking beyond oneself, for applying the golden rule?
I don't know I can't imagine life that if it's a zero sum game, I can't imagine a life that is not bettered through treating people kindly. I don't yeah, I mean, what do you really gain in the end? I mean, and what was your life like in getting there? And if it's a zero sum game and it really doesn't matter, and that's where you come from, I still think the game is not a zero sum game when you're alive and you have feelings and you have, you want. I guess I don't find any greater joy than when, and I've got a big family, I got 7 kids and a lot of, than when I see the joy in somebody else. I think that's a greater joy than I could get myself. So why wouldn't you want that? So I just think you can make life really difficult if you choose. And and I often see it, and please don't take this offensively, anybody, but seniors are a great story for me, because as people get older and older, and I'm certainly getting close to that, I always think that seniors go to the extremes. Nobody's nobody's trying to hide anything anymore. Nobody's trying to pretend like they're somebody that they're not. They are exactly who they are, and boy, you're going to hear it. And it's either really, really, really nice and it gets better all the time, or it's really, really, really miserable and it doesn't get better all the time. And quite honestly, when I see that happening, why would you want to be miserable? why, it's we only have so much time here together, and why wouldn't you want to find joy? And it's certainly not in the material things.
I want to thank you for this wonderful conversation. It certainly was inspirational. I was going to ask you about your experiences in Notre Dame, but luckily you included it in the talk.
Well, that was my worst experience. Let me tell you about my best. No, I'm teasing.
Well, have a great evening, and thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Everybody, bye-bye.
Bye.